here. This is another DrumWise Meets, and today we've got Tom Meadows with us.
Hey everybody, I'm Tom Meadows. I'm currently, and for the last 10 years, playing with Kylie Minogue. I also split my time with people like Will Young, and historically, people like Girls Aloud, Duffy, Leona Lewis, Lucy Silvers, James Morrison in the studio. Yeah, lots of different sort of pop acts, basically.
So, Tom, what equipment are you currently using? Not right now, of course.
Not right now. Right now, I'm using a practice pad in my son's bedroom. But in general, I use Istanbul Agop cymbals. I've been with them for nearly 12 years now. Beautiful people, beautiful cymbals. I use Ludwig drums. I'm a big fan of their Legacy series, but all through their ranges, it's super consistent. But I'm even more of a fan of their vintage stuff. I've been using now for the last 2 or 3 years the standard series of drums, which were they're kind of cheaper line of drums for a long time, but same wood, same layup, same everything, just different lugs, different nut boxes. And they are super cool. So yeah, Ludwig drums. I also use their hardware, which is great, just super sturdy. I'm very excited about the reissue of their Speed King pedal, which I think is going to be very interesting to check out. Hopefully a sort of less fragile version of the original.
Less squeaky.
Yes, exactly, less squeaky. I use Remo drumheads, which I'm very pleased to be a part of their team. I use their vintage A's, for the most part coated vintage A's, which are fantastic. I use Vic First sticks. I use a personalized version of their SD2 Bolero stick, which is a maple stick. It's kind of, I don't know, it's probably not quite a 2B, but it's definitely thicker than a 5B. Because it's maple, it's very light, and it's got a bull tip, so it's it really makes cymbals speak. You know, you get that sort of woodiness and that breath. Beautiful sound. So Vic First sticks. I use Porter and Davis stools, which are absolutely fantastic. I was really lucky enough to meet Dill. I think about 2012 now. It's been a long time, and he gave me a couple of seats to try out, and we just. I mean, I blew up quite a lot because, as we'll come on to talk about, from an electronics point of view, I mean, a lot of my shows are electronics heavy. So you can't set something up for one frequency that is consistent throughout the show. You know, I'll have a kick drum that sounds like a, and then I'll have a kick drum that's a big 808 or whatever. So I did blow up quite a few, but thankfully they seemed to be cool with it, and we went through a whole process. And now, I mean, I've probably used the same seat tops and amps for probably, I don't know, the last 6 or 7 years, I would have thought now. Big part of my show, on most gigs actually, is Yamaha electronics. So I use their DTX Brain, which is wonderful. It's so solid, so reliable. The only issues I've ever had have been human error, me usually, or my drum tech maybe, but usually me. And their XP70 pads, which are great, really sort of basic, not fancy, not like dual zone or anything. Although I do have a couple of the XP100s, which allow me to do like real-time filtering and things like that, which is cool. I use DrumTech fat pedals, which are kick drum trigger pedals, which I think a few people have sort of copied now, but they're just the original. Like, I've got about 8 or 9 of them. They're just solid, really easy to sit in the footprint of my kit. And I use some Drum Tech pole pads as well, which again are really nice and sleek. They're literally poles, they're dual zone, they're FSR technology, so they don't double trigger, and they just sit really, really nicely. I also use a couple of Doors pads for the electronic side of things. They're super cool, small, really quick response. What else? A head armor cases, which are great. Really cool guys. Great cases. Oh god, I bet you I'm forgetting someone or something. Oh, Simpad foams, which are really great. Just super consistent. Oh man, I bet you someone's going to be really angry with me. But yeah, that's my main sort of gear that I take out.
What bands did you listen to when you were growing up, and what's the main style or genre, I suppose, that influenced your drumming?
When I was really young, me and my mate at primary school, his older brother was into David Bowie, so I was really into Bowie when I was a kid, and I think again my mate David's older brother got us into like Dire Straits and things like that, and I listened to Pink Floyd as well. I think that might have been my older cousin. But when I started playing drums, which was, I suppose, relatively quite late, I think maybe like 12 or 13, it was a very conscious choice. What genre has born more legends than any other? And in my mind, it was jazz music. So I sort of made myself listen to jazz music, and as a consequence, I fell in love with jazz music, and it's a love affair that has lasted very much to this day. I don't play it professionally as much as I used to, but it's all I used to play up until I got into the sort of singer-songwriter scene and started to be asked to do more of that. And it's funny, I see a lot of my contemporaries from back in the day who were diehard jazzers now. I see them playing with a lot of sort of singer-songwriters, and it's quite funny that I was sort of ostracized for a minute there because I sort of dared to go to the dark side, and here they all are. But yeah, I mean, jazz music was and still is an absolute passion for me. It was a real mix of people like Dennis Davis and Tony Thompson, and Omar Hakim with David Bowie, Pete Withers and people like that with Dire Straits, Nick Mason with Pink Floyd, but then also, without really knowing it, people like Jimmy Cobb, Elvin Jones, Max Roach, Philly Joe, all the sort of classics. So it was a real mix. I don't know whether I had a sort of thing that defined my sound up until, I don't know, I kind of came across a few John Scofield records that had people like Steve Jordan on them. But I suppose really Charlie Watts has been quite a big influence from my sort of youth. When I got to like sort of 17, 18, people like Jeremy Stacey, Andy Gangadine, Ian Thomas, Pete Lewinson, a lot of the sort of great, Neil Wilkinson, the great sort of British drummers. Pop music wasn't so homogenous back then. So, I remember seeing Andy Gangadine play at the Tufnell Park Tavern in North London with like a covers band. But, I'd also seen him play with M People on Later with Jules Holland, 2 weeks before that. And I think that every drummer, one of my first gigs was Seal at the Brixton Academy, to go and see, obviously not to play. And it was Ian Thomas. And, Ian Thomas sounded like Ian Thomas playing Seal's music. But you'd go and see Gangadine play with, Massive Attack or whoever it was. And, everyone sounded different. I think there's a real sort of homogeny now, which is a shame. A lot of people just sound like everybody else. And I'm not necessarily saying that's their fault, but it's a fault of sort of what people are being told they want to hear. So it's like, you have to play like this. This is what the public want. I don't necessarily think that's true, but who am I to say? But so yeah, it was a much more interesting and eclectic scene, I think, 10, 15 years ago.
What's the biggest highlight of your career so far to date, do you think?
I mean, I would count myself incredibly lucky to not be able to pinpoint just one, really. You know, a few years ago when I was playing with Duffy, and we spent a lot of time in the States, and I got the opportunity to do all of the late night shows. Some of them 2 or 3 times. Like we did Leno, I think we did Leno 3 times. But then, you know, fast forward a couple of years from that to do the Hollywood Bowl with Kylie was brilliant. And then, you know, come forward just to last year to do Glastonbury, you know, to be playing with arguably one of the icons of sort of pop music of the 20th century, the biggest audience in Glastonbury history in that field. I mean, it's just bonkers. Look, nothing to do with me. They would have done it whether I was there or not. I'm just very pleased to be tagging along for the ride. But I think the biggest highlight for me really is to be playing, to get to play these sort of iconic songs with the artist. You know, to do Kylie's catalogue, that, you know, she's got some massive hits that transcend time and place. But then, you know, when I'm on the Will Young gig, which is one of my favorite things to do, just an extraordinary band, ridiculous band. And Will is wonderful. But, you know, to be playing songs like Leave Right Now with him, you know, as I say, back in the day, to do Mercy with Duffy, you know, that song appeared fresh off the press when we were in rehearsals with it. It had just been mixed. I was like, okay, guys, this is the last song, you know, and it's, you know, I didn't actually like it, to be honest. When I first heard it, I was like, this is rubbish. What do I know? To do Bleeding Love with Leona Lewis, you know, it's like, to get to play these iconic songs with the artist that originally sang them, I think to me is the biggest highlight of all. You know, it's an extraordinary thing.
I love that answer. That's brilliant. I mean, I've very much on a lesser scale, but I've had it where, you know, I've been learning songs for an audition with a band or something like that. I can very much remember getting there, being nervous, and then going and playing. And as soon as you start doing it, and as soon as they start singing, and you're like, wow, I'm actually playing this with the guys that I've been listening to.
Yeah.
That exactly. Feeling, you know, and it's just,
Exactly. And ultimately, it's not about you, it's not about them, it's about what that song is doing to the people listening to it. And, you know, especially in times like this, you know, I think that's why music and the arts, it will come back. And you know what, man, thinking about it, the arts have been so denigrated as far as budgets and things like that are concerned in schools. Actually, what do people want right now? They want film, they want books, they want music. Maybe people are finally seeing that we're not waste of space after all, and actually we create something that elevates people's lives and takes people away from where we're at right now.
Yeah, let's bring back higher music budgets for secondary schools.
Absolutely, it's ridiculous.
So when you first get a gig with a new artist, how are you expected to learn the songs? Is it by ear, just by listening to the tracks? Is the sheet music just given to you? I suppose it obviously depends on the gig, but generally, how's it worked for you?
Generally, you're given music to learn, not charts, not anything like that. It's kind of changed a lot. You know, the idea of rehearsals when I first started back in the Stone Ages was that's when you learnt the song, right? Now you're expected to know the material before you come into rehearsal, and rehearsals are almost like finishing schools, you know, just dotting the I's, crossing the T's and tweaking. I don't know if there's any better or worse, it just is what it is. Years ago, I'd be given, you know, a CD or an iTunes link or whatever. Now I'm given stuff on Dropbox, you know, and it's changing all the time. With a gig like Kylie, I'm used to it now, but I'll never forget. So her arranger and MD, a guy called Steve Anderson, who's a very dear friend of mine now, but I first started working with him with a French artist called Christophe Willem, and I'd never worked with him before. I knew of him, but I got sent like the songs on CDs, and I learned them. So I just had them on all the time. The best piece of advice for learning songs, not to sort of digress too much, but just have them on everywhere. Have them on if you're going for a run. Have them on if you're going for a walk. Have them on when you're cooking. Just have them on. Let the music come into you by osmosis, really, because there are some songs that we know that we don't think we know because we've listened to it all of our lives, right? So if someone calls out, I don't know, Honky Tonk Woman, I'll be like, oh, I don't know that. Of course you do. Of course you do, because I've listened, Anyway, so I learned it and I learned it and I learned it. And then we were just about to go into rehearsals, and Steve sent an email to the guys going, okay, so here's the arrangements of the songs. I was like, what? I've learned the songs. And we were just about to go. He was like, no, the way I work is I'm literally changing stuff up to the minute that you go on stage. So that was a new way of working, one which I've become used to now. So what I do with Kylie is what I learn sketches, and I don't get too deep into it, because with an artist like Kylie, which is very electronic heavy from my point of view, not so much with like Will Young. That's a beautiful a gig. That's playing. There's some electronics, but it's playing. I spend a lot of time with the MD, the band MD, and we'll open up the Pro Tools session, and I'll say, okay, give me that. I can play that. No, you can't have that because that's part of a loop that I can't separate. So, it's like I know the arrangement. The verse is 8 bars, the chorus is 12, but in terms of what I'm playing, it's very much let's open up the session and have a look at what's in there. So it's a little bit more ad hoc when I get into the room. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, totally. And going back to what you said about rehearsals, my next question actually was, so once you've learnt the songs, generally, how many rehearsals would you get before a show?
Again, I mean, things are changing. With Duffy, I was in rehearsals for 6 months before we did a gig. She just wanted to get a band together in a room regularly, like 2 or 3 times a week, just play some songs, which is why we were getting songs sent to us all the time. We'd never heard Mercy before. We were just about to do her first. We did like an acoustic tour in Ireland, and Mercy came through, and that was the first time we'd ever heard it. With Kylie, my first tour with her was 6 weeks rehearsal, 4 weeks band rehearsal, 2 weeks production rehearsal in a sort of a stage, soundstage facility where all the staging is there and lights and dancers are in the, so it's like you're literally running it for technical purposes. For someone like Will Young, it's like a week, maybe 4 or 5 days. It really does depend, and that's, I don't know. I mean, there's an element of like the longer you rehearse, how sometimes the first take is always the best.
Yeah.
So there's an element of like the more you play it, the more it actually the more you play yourself out of it.
Yeah.
So sometimes yes, it's great to have the luxury of 4 weeks. You come in, you have a coffee, you chat about stuff. You maybe do two or 3 songs a day, and that's your thing for a month. But sometimes it's nice to be like, we've got 2 days and we've got 38 songs. Let's go.
Yeah.
And you are flying by the seat of your pants. There's something quite cool about that too. I don't mind.
Has it worked for you before where you've done several rehearsals without the lead singer, for example? So just the band, and then the singer comes in for the last rehearsal. Is that something you've done a lot of?
I mean, yeah. Things like that can change. So with Kylie, for example, she loves to just be in with the band. She loves to rehearse. But what will happen is you'll often have like half the day without her and then half the day with her. And then as we get closer to showtime, it'll be the same kind of thing, but the half day that she's not with us, she's in with the dancers. So she's in the whole day working, but just not with us. Someone like Leona Lewis, we would often have like 2 or 3 days without her, and then she'd come in and sort of sing over what we've done. I kind of quite like it actually, because the thing about drums and drummers and rehearsal rooms aren't really always set up to make us sound the best that we can sound. Oftentimes we just sound lots of highs, barely any lows, and it's quite scary for a vocalist, you know? I actually don't mind the fact that their first impression is not us all just bashing through the tune. By the time they come in, it's a little bit more refined, it's a little bit less sort of scratchy, and you know, their first impression can be like, okay, this sounds great. You know, there have been numerous examples over the years of someone coming in and will play it, and there'll be that energy, and you know, the next day I'll be like, that song's gone. You know, because it was just like, it's just too much. So I don't mind having that space with the band to just refine things and make it sort of feel nice and presentable.
When you're playing for an artist like Kylie, do you use many electronics live? So triggers, backing tracks, things like that?
The last tour we did was probably the smallest electronics rig that I've used. But my first tour with her was the most amount of electronics that I'd ever used. I'm a complete technophobe. You know, I mean, literally, I'm just about good to sort of do Apple S, you know, on my laptop. But the concept, the creative possibilities with electronics have always fascinated me. And the drummers that I've loved, that I've mentioned before, people like Gangadine, I remember going to the Forum in Kentish Town in London for like the second Zildjian Day or whatever it was, way back when. And Gangadine debuted the Gangascope, and he was playing, you know, this burgeoning new music, jungle and drum and bass and that kind of stuff. I think it was like 92. And my mind was blown. I mean, I'm not massively into big drum kits, personally. I like sort of small, compact things, which is why I use the triggers and the electronics that I do, because they fit into small spaces. But this behemoth rig being rolled on at the Forum, it was just the most mind-blowing thing I'd ever seen. Lucy Silver's in 2004 was the first time I actually really used a lot of samples, as you know, this was long before the word hybrid was ever attached to a drum kit. And actually, I'm going to take credit for that. No one is ever going to give me credit, but I remember saying to a very dear friend of mine, who is the reason that I play a lot of the electronics gear that I do, a guy called Simon Edgoose. I love him. But I remember saying to him that the Kylie creative people want a full electronic kit on stage for this tour. And I was saying, look, musically, you often want something that isn't really viable on just an electronic kit. So why don't I present you with like a hybrid of I'm telling you, man, 2010, early 2000, maybe even the end of 2009, I coined that phrase. Anyway, Lucy Silver's back in 2004, I was using the D-Drum 3 unit and some Doors pads and stuff. And then it would sort of go up and down, you know, Duffy, the years of Duffy, that was just a 4-piece drum kit with no electronics, it was just playing drums. And then Christoph into Kylie, that's been basically the last 11 years, has been literally, I don't know whether it's because people call me because of that, or it's just the way that pop music is, but you know, Kylie is, her first tour, man, you know, Stuart Price produced that record, and he'd have like a kick drum for the intro, a kick drum for the verse, a kick drum for the bridge, and a kick drum for the chorus, and then maybe another kick drum for the reintro. So I'd be playing kick drums on very non-traditional sources, you know, playing kick drums with my hand, without knowing it. All these sort of, again, I don't want to digress, but you know, kids get really annoyed when you talk to them about like coordination and stuff, and they sort of go, yeah, but I'm never going to do that. And I think, well, maybe you won't. Maybe you'll never play cascara and, you know, playing a clave with the left foot or whatever. But what about that time that you've run out of bass drum sources and you need to play a bass drum pattern with your left hand, you know? So anyway, that was really heavy, and that was the time that my rig, it was really important. And the Yamaha DTX, it was the DTX Stream back then. Now it's the DTX 900 that I'm using, and it's just wonderful to be able to put my own sound sources into the back, loads up, solid, and you know, I'm getting into Ableton a little bit now, which is basically cleaning up. I'm very old school. Like, there's cobwebs on my stuff. Like I said, I'm a real technophobe. I like putting sounds into the machine and choreographing them around the kit. So like to my left, I have like 4 pads. Back in the day, I'd have 4 pads and then a pole pad up there. So there'd be six possibilities with the hand. I'd have a little electronic kick drum and a fat pedal around there. So it was almost like an electronic cocktail kit. And then I'd have a pad in between my hi-hat and my rack tom. I'd have the pole pad in between the rack tom and the floor tom. And then I'd have another pole pad above the floor tom. And I'd have a trigger on the kick drum and 2 fat pedals on either side of my traditional kick drum. So it was heavy. It was real, and that's the heaviest it's ever been at. Actually, it's been sort of less and less each time. Ableton will switch sounds for you. You can just have 1 pad, and you know, it will change all the samples that you've got across 6 pads. You just need 1 pad. But I kind of like how I do it. I'm in control. It works for me. You know, as I've said, any issues have been user error rather than, you know, oh man, the gear's just not working for me. The track I kind of think about like an orchestra, really, you know, and you're not going to carry an orchestra around with you. It's just there, you know. You see, like, I think probably the only band alive today that actually has as many musicians on stage as there is sounds is like the Rolling Stones. You know, everyone has something running because we just like to hear everything. You know, we like to hear what we've recorded. People like to hear what they're used to. It was interesting going from Kylie to Will Young. I had to learn how to play drums again, like drums. You know, I had to learn how to play a drum fill, really. You know, things were on me. Dynamics and shifts and movements between sections, they were on me. You know, that was like, oh god. Anyway, but that's a beautiful gig in itself.
And all of these, so playing to track and so on, I guess that means you have to be quite good at playing along to a click.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we like to build things up to be bigger than they are, right? You know, since the dawn of time, there's been a metronome going tick, 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 and, you know, whether it's playing to a metronome or whether it's you're in an orchestra and you're playing to a conductor, you know, something's keeping time for you a lot of the time. So playing to click is just something that I've done all my life, you know, like practicing stickings or coordination or whatever. I'm playing to a click. Or one of my great teachers and now great friend, Mark Roberts, he used to say to me, if you want to sort of get into a feel and understand a style, when you're playing along, try and lose the drums. So your snare drum is taking over the snare drum that's on track. So that's a click. That's a metronome. That's keeping us in time. So yeah, I don't have a problem with it. And I think what we need to do is destigmatize or demythologize this thing, this click. You must be like, you can play to a click. And also, it doesn't have to be this thing that just goes dink, dink, if you don't like that and it's not helping you, put a shaker in between the quarter notes, or do something to make it playable along to. When the curtain goes up, or the kabuki comes down, or whatever it is, whatever your entrance is. We did a show in Brazil, very luckily, just before the lockdown. I've never heard a louder crowd in my life. And, you know, I have everything to hand so that I can turn up my click, I can turn up my mix. You know, I have everything in my rack behind me for those reasons, because you get, I'll never forget doing V Festival with Girls Aloud, and something had happened, because you don't really get sound checks for festivals. Maybe you get a line check, but you're not really involved in that. And all I had was click and overheads. And the overheads were the loudest thing in my life. And the intro to their show at that time was just like cymbal swells. And I just had nothing else, just click and overheads. And it was the most horrendous experience of my life. But, you know, for the most part, I just want click so that everything's solid, and then level-wise, everything else on a sliding scale down from that.
For you, what makes a good session drummer who can play for multiple artists and makes someone that is going to be successful in the music industry?
I think a lot of it is pretty much common sense. I think a lot of it is what makes you a good human being, as well as a good, whatever it is, plumber, painter and decorator, drummer, whatever. It's just about being approachable, being adaptable, because ultimately, look, I've worked with the same people for like 10 years. So in a way, if that was all I did, I wouldn't really be a freelance drummer anymore. I'd just be like, you know, a hired hand, yes, but I work with the, you know, I go to the same people every day. I do different stuff in between, but there are some freelance musicians who are doing something different every week. And that's where it's just about being able to make people feel at ease and be able to read the room. Actually, if you want to sort of crystallize it down, know when it's good to be, you know, chatty and crack a few jokes and be a bit verbose, but also know when it's time to just stay stum and do your job, really. I'm not saying I get it right all the time, because I don't, but, you know, 20 odd years, you sort of, yeah, just learn how to read the room. A lot of people are scared of drums. They really are. They see them as loud. They see them as something that's gonna, you know, play over what they do. You know, most singers that I've met are, at least at the start, afraid of drums. And I think reading the room in a musical way is understanding that, you know, some people like that energy and that fire, and they want you to be playing hard and they want you to be sweating. And actually some people just don't want you to play cymbals, you know, and that's cool. So you know, you have to read the room in that sense too, and play the room, play to the room. You know, if it is one of those rehearsal rooms that I was talking about that is just horrible and not really meant for us, then make it work for you. Understand what it is that you have to do. If you, in the most extreme way, if you have to put a hot rod, if you're right-handed, in your right hand to play the hi-hat and the crashes and stuff, you know, then do that. But so I guess that all comes down to adaptability and flexibility, right? Just being a sort of having an awareness, and treating music like a language. So a lot of people see, I don't really use the word session musician, because I grew up at a time where session musician was seen as this dirty word. So I've always used freelance, which is a bit weird, really. But you know, most of the freelance session musicians, whatever, people that I meet are the most passionate, sort of total music geeks. They love, you know, they love learning stuff. It's the most opposite to the sort of soulless, breadhead, just going from gig to gig wherever the money is. That's what session musicians used to be seen as. It's not that at all. These are people that love music and love the opportunity to play different styles and understand different styles and work with different people. So, you know, there is that passion and there is that sort of almost professorial approach to it. Like there's a new gig and it's a new style, and I'm going to listen and I'm going to get records and I'm going to figure it out. And, you know, for me, the one thing I love about doing a new gig is what gear am I going to bring? Because my gear is like my costume to make me, when I sit behind it, a very long time ago, I did a gig with a guy called Jamie Hintz, who is now in the Kills, or is now is the Kills. But it was Jeremy Stacey had produced and played on the record, and I got asked to tour it, and it was just incredible, like art, rock, punk sort of things, but very clever, you know, lots of odd times, and again playing to backing tracks, click, you know, back then it was a super sort of basic way of doing it, but the only kit I had at that time, I think it was like I was playing like a Yamaha kit, and it was like a 10 14 20. It was like the most sort of inappropriate. Jeremy had been playing, you know, these ridiculous sort of old beautiful drums, probably like a 24-inch kick for it, you know, and it was fine, but like I look back now and I think, wow, I mean, that was all I had to hand, but I'm very lucky now that I have an array of sounds that I can put together, and that's my costume. That's when I sit down and I feel like I'm in that gig now. And so when I hit the rack tom, it's the right sound. It's not going boo when it should go ooh, you know, or whatever. So yeah, it's that's what I love about getting a new gig these days.
So what does the future hold for you in terms of what gigs you've got coming up, tours, festivals?
Well, what I did have upcoming, I did a record last year with a guy called Luke Evans. Again, that was with my friend Steve Anderson, who produced it. And so Luke Evans is a sort of Hollywood actor, but he came up through sort of musical theatre and stuff, and he wanted to do a record. So he signed to BMG, and we did his record, and we were going out on tour this April, doing some shows, which would have been fun. Great band in that one too. And then the summer was Will Young. He was doing a co-headline with James Morrison, which I was really excited about because it was Neil Wilkinson. I've got a couple of friends in James Morrison's band, but Neil Wilkinson I've known for a long time. I couldn't call him a friend of mine in the sense that we don't like hang out, but I met him when I was really young, and he's just the loveliest human being. And I was really excited to hear him play every night, and just hang out with him really, and sort of get to know him again. And you know, we were doing things like Glastonbury and Pride and stuff. There were some really cool festivals in there with Will. So I mean, the next thing, depending on what happens in the world, is I start again in November.
I think the most important question for you in this session here is one that you really have to give some thought to. What's your favourite biscuit?
That is very easy because I've won the battle in my household. It's a regular digestive.
A regular digestive?
A regular digestive. Just
Not
a
even a
straight
milk
up.
chocolate.
No, I mean, I'll take it. I'll take it if it's there. I'm a big biscuit fan. You don't get to my size, you know, less a 6-pack, more a family pack, without enjoying the delights of a biscuit. But man, I love just a straight up regular digestive. That's the one for me.
What's your best advice for up and coming drummers that want to make a career out of drumming? If you had to choose one thing, that's a hard one.
Well, I don't know whether it's the best piece of advice because of where we're at in terms of the industry. But what I would really like to see, and therefore what I would advise any young musician, is to be you. We spend a lot of time chasing gigs because either we need the money or we think it's a prestige gig or whatever, a multitude of reasons. But I genuinely believe what is meant for you will not pass you by. And by being you, that gives you the best opportunity to get that right gig, you know, rather than being shoehorned into something that is not right for you and you're uncomfortable for however many years. You know, just be you, be who you are, play the way you play. I think the time for me that my playing and my career changed was when I started playing what I wanted to hear. And that's when people that I've been playing with for a while would turn around and they go, "Hey, you sounded great tonight." And it's because I wasn't trying to second guess what drummers in the audience want to hear. I was playing what I wanted to hear and what I would want to listen to for the rest of my life. And so be you, play what you think is correct, play what you think is appropriate, play how you want to play, and you may lose some gigs. You know, maybe not like get fired from a gig per se, but you may not get asked to do the gig. But ultimately, the gigs you do get will be a much more fulfilling experience and long lasting because it comes from an honest place.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for giving up your time to spend some time with us here at DrumWise. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, absolute pleasure.
Take care of yourself and all the best.
Yeah. See you in the autumn.